Today, we uncover the story of Georgy Zhukov, the man millions call the Marshal of Victory. But what if I told you that the truth is far more complex than school textbooks and grand parades? Zhukov was born in a peasant hut, rising from a village boy to the greatest commander of the 20th century. His name became a symbol of triumph, but also a symbol of fear for those who served under him. He saved cities and won battles, but he ordered the execution of his own soldiers for retreating. Are you ready to learn the truth about the man who forever changed the course of World War II? Zhukov's story is the story of a nation living on the edge of survival. When a deadly shadow hung over the USSR, he was the one who shouldered a monstrous responsibility. His decisions saved millions, but sacrificed hundreds of thousands. Can a man be called a hero if he wins a war at the cost of so many lives? Today, we will open the pages of his life, look into the archives, and separate myth from reality. You will find out what he was really like in the trenches, in the Kremlin offices, and in face-to-face confrontations with Stalin. How a peasant's son turned into the terror of his enemies and became the most powerful warlord of the 20th century, and how his name was almost banned after the war. But why did Stalin, who destroyed all his political opponents, leave Zhukov alive? The answer lies in a paradox. Stalin loathed Zhukov for his popularity, yet he was terrified to fight a war without him. Zhukov was the only man in the USSR who could scream at the dictator and bang his fist on the table in the Kremlin office. Stalin tolerated this insolence. He tolerated it because he knew, without this rough man, he would lose power. This is the story of how the Marshal of Victory became the father of nations' worst nightmare. And now a question for you, the viewer. If you were in Zhukov's place, would you give an order that saves the country, but destroys tens of thousands of your own soldiers? Write your opinion in the comments. Your answer matters, because this is how we understand the true price of victory. Childhood in the shadow of the empire. The village of Strelkovka, a tiny speck on the map of the Russian Empire at the end of the 19th century. Here, in a peasant hut, a boy was born who was destined to become the Marshal of Victory. His name was Georgy. From childhood, he knew the meaning of cold, hunger, and hard labor. His father was a simple peasant who could not read. His mother was a strict but caring woman who taught her son the most important lesson: survive at any cost. There were no books in this house, only the smell of damp earth, smoke from the stove, and endless work. Are you ready to find out how a man capable of commanding millions rose from this world of poverty? From an early age, Georgy herded cattle, worked in the fields, and hauled water. He was only 12 when he was sent as an apprentice to a furrier. Here he learned to endure hunger, cold, and humiliation. The master of the workshop did not spare the rod, but it was there that the character of the future marshal was forged. The boy understood, to get out of this hell, you have to be stronger than everyone else. In the 1890s, the empire was changing. Industrialization, the growth of cities, the first workers' strikes. But in Strelkovka, everything was the old way: hard life, poverty, disease. Every day was like the last. Can you imagine that from this remote world would emerge a man capable of dictating terms to Stalin himself? Georgy grew up stubborn, reserved, and silent. He didn't like to complain, and if he fell, he got up again. His peers quickly realized that it was dangerous to mess with him. He could fight back against anyone. Even then, this boy was learning to command, first himself, then others. The general's story began right here, amidst dusty roads and the smell of manure. In one of his rare, candid conversations later in life, Zhukov recalled how he dreamed of a different existence. He saw soldiers passing by the village and imagined himself in their boots. The military uniform seemed to him a symbol of strength, a chance to escape poverty. He did not know that in a few years, these dreams would lead him to the battlefield, where he would see death up close for the first time. Do you want to know what happened when he first picked up a weapon? Zhukov's childhood is a story of hardening. Every wound, every blow of the rod made him tougher. He learned to endure pain and hide tears. He learned to win even when there were no chances. He would carry these lessons through his whole life, turning them into orders that millions would obey. Revolution and Civil War. World War I became a turning point in young Georgy's fate. He was mobilized into the cavalry and found himself at the front, where mud and blood mixed with the smell of gunpowder. Here, he first tasted fear and tasted victory. His bravery did not go unnoticed. Georgy received the St. George Crosses, combat awards of the Russian Empire. Guess what the peasant boy felt? Receiving a soldier's medal from the hands of an officer. But with the awards came losses. Death became a familiar neighbor. Every battle took comrades away, leaving new scars on the body and in the soul. Here, he realized, those who act quickly, decisively, without unnecessary hesitation, survive. This brutal school made him who he would later become, a man who makes life and death decisions in seconds. The February Revolution found him in the ranks. The monarchy fell, and with it, the established order collapsed. Some were confused, some fled. But Georgy remained in the army. He was not a politician, but his instinct told him, the future belongs to those who take power by force. Do you want to know how a peasant's son became a Red commander? The Civil War began, and young Zhukov made a choice: the Red Army. For him, it was not so much an ideological step as a chance to stay in the ranks and continue the path of a warrior. He participated in battles against the Whites, defending Soviet power. It was here that his ruthlessness emerged: execution for desertion, punishment for insubordination. Zhukov spared no one, not even himself. The Red Army in those years was chaotic and poorly armed, but it was winning. The young commander rose quickly through the ranks. Talent and iron discipline set him apart from others. He learned to manage people, feel their fear, and use it. It was a climb to the top, a path where the weak perished and the strong survived. Can you guess what quality Zhukov considered the most important for a commander? By the end of the Civil War, Georgy was already commanding a squadron. He gained experience that no military school could offer. He realized that war is not only strategy and tactics, but also psychology. Soldiers should fear the enemy, but they should fear their commander even more. This philosophy would remain with him forever and become his main weapon. Soviet-Mongolian campaign and Khalkhin goal. After the Civil War, Zhukov remained in the army. He studied, commanded regiments, and rose through the service. It seemed a quiet career awaited him, but history had prepared a world-class exam for him. In the late 1930s, fighting with the Japanese began on the border of Mongolia and Manchuria. The Soviet Union could not afford a defeat. A commander capable of turning the tide of war was needed, and Stalin appointed Zhukov. Are you ready to hear how one man changed the balance of power in the Far East? Summer 1939. Khalkhin Gol, a river that became an arena of fierce battles. Japanese units invaded Mongolian territory, hoping to quickly seize key heights. The Red Army suffered defeat after defeat. Zhukov arrived at the front, and the first thing he did was restore order. He restored discipline with an iron hand for cowardice and unauthorized retreats, tribunal, sometimes execution. This shocked his subordinates, but the result was not long in coming. The army tightened like a fist. Zhukov understood that victory was impossible without a decisive blow. He meticulously prepared the operation, gathering reserves, bringing up artillery and tanks. For the first time in history, the Red Army applied a deep encirclement of the enemy from two sides. It was a daring gamble, to surround the Japanese troops and annihilate them. Guess how this gamble ended? In August, the offensive began. Soviet tanks, infantry, and artillery moved forward. The battle lasted for days and nights. The Japanese resisted furiously. But Zhukov's plan worked. The enemy was caught in a cauldron. It was a rout. Japanese units lost most of their personnel, and equipment burned on the steppe plains. Khalkhin goal became Zhukov's triumph and the Soviet Union's first major victory over the regular army of a strong adversary. But the price was terrible. Hundreds of Soviet soldiers remained lying in the Mongolian soil. Their deaths did not stop the commander. Zhukov ordered to finish off the encircled enemy, leaving no one. Many were struck by his cold determination. He allowed himself no pity because he knew defeat would cost the country much more. Are you ready to find out how this victory changed his fate? After Khalkhin goal, Zhukov became a national hero. He was nominated for the title of Hero of the Soviet Union. For the first time, he entered the highest offices of the Kremlin and spoke personally with Stalin. Their meeting was the beginning of a complex relationship, respect, but also constant tension. Stalin saw in him a man capable of anything for victory, but also a man who needed to be kept under control. This campaign became a dress rehearsal for Zhukov for the future battles of the Great Patriotic War. He realized that victory is the result of total control, discipline, and precise calculation. He learned to use fear as a tool for managing an army, and he would soon apply this lesson in a far more terrible war. Do you want to know what happened when the full might of the Wehrmacht struck the Soviet Union? Zhukov and the Purges. The 1930s. Heavy years, full of horror and foreboding. The USSR shuddered from a wave of repressions. Every day brought new arrests, new lists, new sentences. The country lived in fear. At night in villages and cities, footsteps were heard. They came for neighbors, colleagues, friends. By morning, they vanished without a trace. Do you want to know how Georgy Zhukov managed to survive this time without losing his rank or his head? The Red Army in these years lost almost its entire command staff. Hundreds of commanders of regiments, divisions, and corps were accused of conspiracy. Marshals, generals, talented staff officers, many of them were shot. Command structures literally crumbled. Young lieutenants took command of units, having neither experience nor training. Zhukov saw the army weakening every day. He understood. A new war was ahead, and the enemy would take advantage of this. Every night was a test. A packed field bag lay in his office, just in case they came for him. He slept fully dressed so as not to waste time. Soldiers on guard whispered rumors about new arrests. People disappeared like water down a drain. Zhukov waited for his turn, but his turn did not come. Instead of arrest, came an order for promotion. He was sent to command a corps. Why? Stalin valued those who knew how to act ruthlessly. Georgy acted exactly like that. He demanded discipline from subordinates and was merciless to violators. Even during the years of repression, he did not try to justify friends, did not write petitions for them. And this saved him. Do you want to know what price he paid for his survival? Zhukov's personal life in these years became cold and closed. He did not discuss politics, did not talk about the fates of other commanders. He lived only for the service. Every day began and ended with regiment inspections, checking uniforms, reviewing drills. He turned his unit into a Model 1, knowing that any mistake could be his last. The purges made him even harder. He finally believed that the only way to survive was to keep everything under control. Subordinates feared him, but respected him. He personally checked how soldiers stood in formation, how clean their rifles were, what the shooting results were. No one dared to argue with his orders. The soldiers knew, if the commander said, "Stand to the death," they would have to stand. Otherwise, the tribunal. By the end of the 30s, Zhukov became commander of the Kiev military district, one of the key positions in the army. It was here that he brought troops to combat readiness, staged large maneuvers, and practiced offensive operations. These exercises, in fact, became preparation for the future war. They showed Stalin that Zhukov was a man of action, capable of leading masses of troops. Stalin began to trust him more than others. But with trust came danger. One whom the leader trusts can become a threat. Are you ready to find out what Zhukov felt when he first found himself at a reception in the Kremlin alone with Stalin? Zhukov understood that his fate was tied to this power. He saw how easily the state breaks and destroys even marshals, as happened with Tukhachevsky. And he accepted the rules of the game. Serve unconditionally, be more effective than the rest, show no unnecessary emotions. This strategy saved his life. But it made him a man for whom the main thing is the order, not compassion. By the beginning of 1941, he became chief of the general staff. Now the entire army depended on his decisions. But with the position came fear. Intelligence reported that war was inevitable. Zhukov urged Stalin to bring troops to full readiness. However, the Kremlin continued to believe that Hitler would not dare to attack. Can you imagine what Zhukov felt in those last peaceful days, knowing the enemy was already preparing to strike? The first blows of war. June 22, 1941. 4 in the morning. The borders of the USSR lit up with fire. The Wehrmacht began Operation Barbarossa. Millions of soldiers, thousands of tanks and planes crashed down on the country. Zhukov, at that moment, was the chief of the general staff. It was he who reported the first summaries of the invasion to Stalin. Do you want to know what that night looked like in the Kremlin when the country first heard the word war? Telephones were exploding with messages. Border units reported bombings of Brest, Grodno, Minsk. Zhukov flew into Stalin's office. He demanded that troops be immediately brought to full combat readiness and strike back, but Stalin was silent. He did not believe that Germany had violated the non-aggression pact. Zhukov insisted, "Delay will destroy the front." These hours became the first hours of his struggle, not only with the enemy, but with the political doubt of the leader. The first days of the war were a catastrophe. Mechanized corps, created on Zhukov's initiative, were smashed in border battles. Troops were surrounded, communications severed. Hundreds of thousands of fighters were taken prisoner. These were the hardest days for the general staff. Zhukov reported on the disaster, demanded permission for troop withdrawal, but Stalin forbade retreat. As a result, entire armies vanished. Can you imagine what a man feels who understands? His decisions cost the lives of hundreds of thousands. In July, Zhukov proposed abandoning Kiev to save troops from encirclement. Stalin exploded. He called it defeatism. Witnesses to that scene were horrified. Zhukov didn't just object, he boiled over. He declared to Stalin, "If you think I'm talking nonsense, then I have nothing to do here. I asked to be relieved of the post of Chief of General Staff and sent to the front. Dead silence hung in the office. In 1941, people were shot on the spot for such words. Beria was already reaching for the case files, but Stalin, swallowing the insult, only quietly replied, "Don't get excited, Comrade Zhukov." In that moment, Zhukov won his first personal battle. But Stalin forgot nothing. Zhukov was removed from the post of Chief of General Staff and sent to command the reserve front. But this is exactly what saved him. He was back in action on the front line among the soldiers. Do you want to know what Zhukov did, finding himself face to face with war again? He immediately organized defenses on the approaches to Moscow. The order was harsh: stand to the death. Rear units were transferred to the front. Militias were armed with whatever was available. Even rifles from the Civil War went into action. Zhukov inspected positions personally, cursed, demanded trenches be dug deeper. He knew, if the enemy broke through, Moscow would fall. In August, he received a new order: to lead the Leningrad front. The city was in a ring. Zhukov arrived and immediately imposed iron order. Any retreat, tribunal. He organized counterattacks, managed to stop the Germans at the very walls of the city. These actions bought time and prevented Leningrad from falling. But the price was terrible. Thousands of lives daily. Can you imagine what it was like for a commander to order people to go to certain death to win a few hours? Returning to Moscow, Zhukov received a new order: to lead the defense of the capital. The Supreme High Command was preparing a counter-offensive. Zhukov gathered reserves from all over the country. Siberian divisions, hardened in the frosts of the taiga, arrived echelon after echelon. Winter became his ally. In December, the Red Army went on the offensive. It was the first serious blow to the Wehrmacht. Moscow was saved. Zhukov became a hero. His name was spoken with respect and sometimes with horror. He was the man who could save the capital, but at a price impossible to forget. These first victories gave hope that the war was not yet lost. Do you want to know what Zhukov felt when he first realized that Germany could be defeated? The Battle of Moscow and the Turning Point. Autumn, 1941. Moscow is gripped by panic. The city lives on rumors. Germans are already in Khimki. Tanks are moving along Leningrad Highway. The government is evacuating. Some institutions and factories are indeed preparing to move beyond the Urals. Stalin makes the decision to stay in the Kremlin, a psychological gesture to keep the capital from chaos. Everything is at stake. It is in these days that Georgy Zhukov receives orders to lead the Western Front. Are you ready to find out exactly how he saved the USSR capital? Zhukov arrives at headquarters near Mozhaisk. The picture is catastrophic. Troops are broken, remnants of divisions are retreating, defense lines are breached. On the Mozhaisk line, only about 9 divisions against nearly 50 German ones. The situation is critical. Zhukov immediately introduces new orders. Retreat without written permission from command is forbidden. Blocking detachments are created in key directions to return panicked soldiers to the ranks. Soldiers understand. Now, we stand to the death. In these days, the headquarters decides to transfer troops from Siberia and the Far East to Moscow. Intelligence reported that Japan would not attack the USSR, and these divisions could be removed from the eastern border. Trains run around the clock. Siberians, hardened in the taiga frosts, become a key reserve. Their arrival inspires the defenders. Now there is strength not only to hold, but to prepare a counter-offensive. Zhukov personally inspects positions. He drives along the front line, listens to battalion commanders, checks equipment, stands in trenches next to fighters himself. His authority is immense. Soldiers see that the commander shares the danger with them. In villages around Moscow, anti-tank ditches are dug, hedgehogs are placed, approaches are mined. Peasants and women work day and night. The city turns into a fortress. November becomes a month of despair. Germans throw fresh forces of Army Group Center at Moscow. The general offensive begins. Panfilov's division fights near Volokholamsk. The legendary 28 heroes stop a tank breakthrough. Near Mojaisk, fighting is for every house. Cadets of the Podolsk schools stand in defense and hold positions at the cost of their lives. These battles become symbols of courage. Zhukov gathers all forces, even rear units, to plug gaps in the front. Meanwhile, Moscow prepares for the worst. On the night of November 5th to 6th, Germans bomb the city. But already on November 7th, a parade takes place on Red Square. Stalin gives a speech promising victory. These frames will go down in history. Soldiers march from the parade straight to the front. Can you imagine the contrast? Solemn marches to the sound of an orchestra and the rumble of distant explosions on the outskirts of the capital. Winter comes unexpectedly fast. Frosts intensify, German equipment begins to freeze. They lack winter uniforms, soldiers freeze in summer gear. The Red Army gains an advantage. Zhukov understands. This is the moment to strike. He prepares a counteroffensive that should become the first major success of the war. December 5th, 1941. Early morning. The offensive begins. Artillery opens fire. Katyushas flood enemy positions with fiery salvos. Siberian divisions go on the attack. Fighting takes place near Klin, Istra, Kalinin, Serpukhov. Germans retreat, abandoning equipment and positions. For the first time in the war, the Red Army attacks on a broad front. Zhukov controls the operation personally. He moves from headquarters to headquarters, giving orders demanding success be exploited. By mid-January, the Germans are pushed back 200 kilometers from Moscow. The danger of encircling the capital has passed. Moscow is saved. Can you believe that this victory was the first major defeat of the Wehrmacht in World War II? This victory raised the morale of the entire country. Newspapers wrote about the heroism of the capital's defenders. Zhukov's name sounded like a symbol of resilience, but he himself felt no euphoria. He saw the lists of the dead, understood the price of this victory. Moscow stood, but the war was just beginning. Ahead, Stalingrad, Kursk, the storming of Berlin. Do you want to know how Zhukov will plan one of the most massive battles in history and encircle Paulus's army? The Stalingrad Trap. Autumn, 1942. The situation is catastrophic. The German army has reached the Volga. The city bearing Stalin's name has turned into burning ruins. Fighting is for every house, every floor, every pile of bricks. It seems the USSR is one step away from defeat. If Stalingrad falls, the Volga will be cut, and the country will be left without oil and bread. Are you ready to learn how, in this moment of despair, the most daring plan of World War II was born? Stalin summons Zhukov to the Kremlin. Nerves are on edge. The leader asks directly, "Can we hold the city?" Zhukov answers, "We can hold it. But for this, a different approach is needed." While General Chuikov, whom we will talk about in a separate video, heroically held the defense inside the burning city, Zhukov and Vasilevsky looked at the map completely differently. They didn't want to just push the Germans back. They wanted to destroy them. Thus, Operation Uranus was born. Zhukov noticed a fatal mistake by Hitler. German flanks, stretched for hundreds of kilometers, were covered by weak Romanian and Italian units. The plan was simple and brilliant. Strike not at the strong center, but at the weak edges, and close the ring behind the back of Paulus's 6th Army. But for this, the impossible was required: to secretly move 1,000,000 soldiers and thousands of tanks in the bare steppe. The greatest game of cat and mouse began. It was total masquerovka, camouflage. Troops moved only at night, with headlights off. All radio communications were forbidden. Fake orders about defensive preparations flew into the ether. The Germans saw the Russians building fortifications and believed the Red Army was exhausted. They didn't even suspect an avalanche was coming at them. Can you imagine the restraint of Zhukov, who waited for the perfect moment while the city's defenders died under bombs, demanding help? November 19th, 1942. Foggy morning. At 7:20 a.m., the silence was shattered by the roar of 3,500 guns. The god of war, artillery, opened the gates of hell for the occupiers. Zhukov's tank wedges tore through the Romanian defense like paper. A few days later, on November 23rd, the ring closed near the town of Khalkhin. A 300,000-strong Wehrmacht grouping, the elite of the German army, was trapped in the cauldron. It was a shock. Hitler went into hysterics, forbidding a breakout, while Paulus sent telegrams that soldiers were dying of hunger and cold. Zhukov outplayed the German generals strategically. Stalingrad became the beginning of the end for the Third Reich. The myth of the Wehrmacht's invincibility was buried in the snows of the Volga region. And it was after this victory that the world understood. Zhukov is a man who knows not just how to fight, but how to win. Do you want to know how, after this triumph, the Marshal launched an offensive that would lead him to the walls of Berlin? The Dnieper and the liberation of Ukraine. Summer 1943. The Wehrmacht tried to take revenge at Kursk, but Zhukov and Vasilevsky predicted the strike and ground down German tanks in the greatest tank battle in history. Now the road to the west was open. After the Kursk bulge, the Red Army went on the offensive along the entire front. The goal, to liberate Ukraine and reach the Dnieper. But this was not just another frontier. It was a huge natural barrier. The river width reached 1 kilometer in places, and the banks were high and steep. The Germans hoped to turn the Dnieper into an impregnable eastern wall. Are you ready to find out how the Red Army broke through this line, despite monstrous losses? Zhukov during this period acted as the representative of the Supreme High Command on the Voronezh, Steppe, and Central fronts. He coordinated the actions of the fronts, checked readiness for crossings, demanded acceleration of the offensive pace. The Soviet command understood. If they didn't make it by autumn, the enemy would fortify on the right bank, and the operation would drag on for months. The Chernigov-Pripyat operation began. Fronts moved forward rapidly, liberating left bank Ukraine. By mid-September, troops reached the Dnieper on a huge front. And then the most terrible part began: the crossing. There were no bridges, not enough pontoon parks. Soldiers crossed on improvised means: boats, rafts, sometimes swimming. Many drowned under enemy fire. These crossings would later be called bloody. Can you imagine what a fighter felt, swimming across a wide river, holding a rifle above his head while bullets whistled around? On the right bank, fierce battles raged for every bridgehead. Zhukov demanded positions be held at any cost. Headquarters sent orders: exploit success, expand captured areas. The struggle for the Bukhrin bridgehead south of Kiev was especially heavy. Several times Soviet troops tried to break through from there to the city, but Germans repelled the attacks. Zhukov supported the decision to shift the main blow to the north, to the Liutezh area. This became the key moment of the operation. In late October, the Kiev offensive operation began. Thousands of guns opened fire. Tank armies moved forward. The Liutezh bridgehead unfolded into a powerful striking fist. On November 5th, troops burst into Kiev. Battles were fought for every street. But on the morning of November 6th, the city was completely liberated. This victory had a huge moral effect. Residents greeted fighters with bread and salt, crying with joy. Do you want to know what order Zhukov gave immediately after taking Kiev? He ordered the offensive to be developed further towards Zhytomyr to prevent the Germans from entrenching. Fighting continued all winter. The liberation of right bank Ukraine became one of the bloodiest operations of the war. Red Army losses amounted to hundreds of thousands of people. But the strategic goal was achieved. The enemy was knocked out beyond the Dnieper. The front rolled far to the west. This campaign showed that the Red Army had learned to fight on equal terms with the Wehrmacht. Zhukov reported to Stalin that now the initiative was finally with the USSR. But even more massive operations lay ahead. The next step would be the liberation of Belarus and the destruction of Army Group Center. Can you guess how Zhukov and headquarters managed to hide preparations for the largest offensive of the war from the Germans? Operation Bagration and the liberation of Belarus. Summer 1944. The front stabilized at the Vistula and in the territory of Belarus. Germans prepared to hold Minsk, Orsha, Mogilev. This was a crucial node of their defense. It was here that Army Group Center stood. More than 1 million men, hundreds of tanks, thousands of guns. The Supreme High Command decided to strike exactly here. The operation was named Bagration, in honor of the hero of the Patriotic War of 1812. Are you ready to find out how the Red Army destroyed this grouping in just 2 months? Zhukov, as a representative of the headquarters, developed the plan together with Vasilevsky. The operation envisaged strikes by 4 fronts simultaneously: 1st Belarusian, 2nd Belarusian, Baltic, and 3rd Belarusian. The main task, to encircle and destroy the enemy in the areas of Vitebsk, Orsha, Mogilev, and Bobruisk. To distract the Germans, a huge deception campaign was conducted. Fake airfields were built, mock-ups of tanks and artillery were ostentatiously moved, creating the appearance of preparing an offensive in Ukraine. The Germans fell for the trick and concentrated reserves in the wrong place. June 23, 1944. Artillery preparation began. Thousands of guns and Katyushas opened fire. German positions were literally swept from the face of the earth. A few hours later, infantry and tanks went on the offensive. Already in the first days, the enemy front was breached in several places. By June 28th, Soviet troops surrounded Vitebsk, destroyed the garrison. The Bobruisk grouping was also surrounded and surrendered. Do you want to know what effect this had on the German command? Hitler was furious. He ordered to hold to the last, forbade troop withdrawal. As a result, entire divisions fell into cauldrons and perished. Soviet armies rapidly developed the offensive. Minsk was surrounded and liberated on July 3rd. Tens of thousands of German soldiers and officers were taken prisoner. In the Minsk cauldron alone, about 100,000 people were destroyed or captured. Zhukov personally controlled the pace of the offensive. He demanded not to stop until the enemy was pushed back beyond the Niemen. Fronts advanced 30 to 40 kilometers a day. It was a lightning operation the likes of which the world had never seen. Army Group Center virtually ceased to exist. German defense in the east collapsed. Can you imagine the scale of this catastrophe? In a month and a half, the front shifted 600 kilometers. After the liberation of Minsk, troops continued the offensive. Grodno, Vilnius, Kaunas were liberated. The Red Army reached the borders of East Prussia. This meant the road to Warsaw and Berlin was open. Stalin was pleased. Zhukov once again proved his strategic genius. His name thundered across the country again. Do you want to know what the next step will be? It will be a swift dash to the west, the Vistula-Oder operation, which will bring the Red Army to the very heart of Germany. Vistula-Oder Offensive. January 1945. Silence on the front, but it is deceptive. The Red Army is preparing a powerful strike that will be the prologue to the battle for Berlin. Headquarters entrusts the operation plan to Zhukov and Konev. Zhukov commands the First Belarusian Front. His armies are to break through from the Magnesu and Puławy areas to the Oder, liberate Warsaw, and create bridgeheads for further advance. Are you ready to find out how the Red Army covered hundreds of kilometers in 3 weeks and swept away German defenses? The plan was audacious. Huge artillery preparation, concentration of tank armies, transfer of thousands of wagons of ammunition. Zhukov personally checked concentration areas, demanded camouflage. The Germans did not suspect that a blow of unseen force was being prepared against them. On January 12th, artillery preparation began. Thousands of guns and katyushas opened fire. German positions turned into a smoking mess. A few hours later, infantry and tanks went on the offensive. The breakthrough was swift. By evening, Soviet troops had advanced 25 kilometers. Can you imagine the faces of German officers when they saw the front collapsing in a single day? The pace of the offensive was stunning. Soviet armies covered 30 to 40 kilometers a day. Germans did not have time to create new defensive lines. On January 15th, Zhukov's troops took Radom. On the 18th, Lodz. On January 20th, the storming of Warsaw began. The German garrison could not hold the city. Warsaw was liberated. It was a strike not only military but symbolic. Poland became free again. Zhukov demanded success be exploited. He understood, if the enemy is given a breather, the front will stabilize. Soviet tank armies raced forward. By the end of January, troops of the First Belarusian Front reached the Oder and seized several bridgeheads. It was a triumph. From the Vistula to the Oder in 23 days. The Red Army had never known such speed of advance. But the price was high. Every day brought thousands of dead. Zhukov strictly controlled discipline, demanded full commitment from army commanders. He understood that now Berlin was close. Only 70 kilometers in a straight line. Do you want to know what order he received from Stalin immediately after reaching the Oder? Headquarters ordered preparations for the operation to storm Berlin. This would be the final showdown. Zhukov knew. Now they expected from him not just victory, but the end of the war. The race for the Reich capital was beginning, and Zhukov's rival would be Konev. Who would enter Berlin first? This is a question that will decide not only the fate of the war, but the place of each commander in history. Battle for Berlin. April 1945. Berlin, the last stronghold of the Third Reich. The Red Army stands on the approaches to the German capital. Stalin demands the war be ended as soon as possible. Zhukov receives the order, take Berlin. Konev competes with him. The commander of the First Ukrainian Front must manage to break through to the city from the south. The race for the Reich capital begins. Do you want to know what price will be paid for this victory? Zhukov concentrates shock armies on the Silo Heights, the last major defensive line before Berlin. The Germans' fortified positions turned them into a real fortress. Concrete bunkers, trenches, minefields. On April 16th, artillery preparation begins. Thousands of guns open fire. Searchlights illuminate the night, intended to blind the enemy. But the Germans prepared in advance, and the attack goes with difficulty. Soviet units suffer heavy losses. Zhukov commits reserves to battle, throws tank armies into the breach. By the evening of the third day, the heights are taken. The road to Berlin is open. On April 20th, street fighting begins on the outskirts of the capital. The city is defended by a garrison of tens of thousands of soldiers and Volkssturm. Every house is turned into a fortress. Every intersection is swept by machine guns. Battles are fought for bridges, blocks, metro stations. Zhukov orders the city to be stormed by assault groups. Infantry supported by tanks and sappers clear house after house. Losses are huge, but the Red Army methodically advances to the center. Can you imagine what soldiers felt, having to fight for every floor, for every room? Meanwhile, Konev's troops enter the southern suburbs of the city. Stalin watches the map, making no secret of his interest. Who will burst into the center first? Zhukov hurries his armies. On April 29th, the storming of the Reichstag begins. Fighting for the building lasts almost 2 days. Germans defend fiercely, launch counterattacks. Finally, on May 1st, the victory banner is hoisted over the Reichstag. The photograph of this moment will go around the world. Hitler is already dead by this time. On April 30th, he committed suicide in the bunker. Berlin capitulates on May 2nd. The war in Europe is effectively over. In ruined Berlin, a meeting took place that could have changed the history of the Cold War. Zhukov met with General Dwight Eisenhower. Two great commanders, Soviet and American, unexpectedly became friends. They respected each other as professionals. Eisenhower treated Zhukov to Coca-Cola. The Marshal liked the drink, but he couldn't drink this symbol of imperialism openly. In Moscow, they would have destroyed him. Then Zhukov asked the Americans to make for him a special batch. At the personal request of General Clark, the Coca-Cola factory released a batch of colorless cola, without caramel, bottled in plain bottles with a red star on the cap. From the outside, it looked like the Marshal was drinking vodka, but it was American soda. This episode shows that even in the midst of ideological war, there was room between soldiers for simple human friendship. The Red Army celebrates victory, but the celebration is overshadowed by the cost. Hundreds of thousands killed and wounded in this operation. Do you want to know how Zhukov felt standing on the ruins of the Reich? He was at the pinnacle of glory. Stalin appointed a victory parade, and here a drama played out, hidden from public eyes. By tradition, the Supreme Commander-in-Chief himself, Stalin, was supposed to receive the parade. He secretly trained in the riding hall. But the dictator was old, and the horse was spirited. During rehearsal, the horse threw Stalin. The leader hurt his side and head. Humiliated, rubbing his bruised shoulder, Stalin hissed through his teeth at Zhukov. "I'm too old to review parades. You do it. You are a cavalryman. You'll manage." June 24th, 1945. Zhukov on a white Arabian stallion, Kumir, idle, prances across Red Square. He looks like an ancient god of war. The whole world sees. Here he is, the true winner. And Stalin stands on the podium, small and gray, watching the triumph of his marshal. Witnesses say that it was in this moment that a verdict could be read in Stalin's eyes. He could not forgive Zhukov for staying in the saddle where the leader himself had failed. Conflict with political leadership and Operation Masquerade. Victory over Germany was still fresh. Troops were returning home, the country was celebrating. But already in 1945, clouds were gathering over Zhukov. Stalin increasingly wondered, Can a man applauded by millions become dangerous to power? The Marshal's popularity was immense. His name was known even in the West. In the Kremlin, this caused jealousy. Are you ready to find out how the victor of Berlin ended up in Odessa, not Moscow? But an excuse was needed, and they found it. The NKVD started the trophy affair. Zhukov was accused of looting. Secret searches were conducted at his dacha and apartment. Chekists scrupulously listed the findings: hundreds of meters of silk, expensive furs, paintings, antique furniture brought from Germany. Zhukov was summoned to the carpet. He didn't deny it, but he didn't repent. He threw in the accusers' faces, "I didn't take this junk for myself, I don't need it." But the blow was struck. From the savior of the fatherland, they were sculpting a hoarder. It was humiliating. Stalin enjoyed the moment. The great marshal stood before him and made excuses for rags. He decides to push Zhukov away from the center of decision-making. In 1946, he is removed from the post of Commander-in-Chief of Ground Forces and appointed commander of the Odessa military district. This was not just a rotation, it was an honorable exile. But Odessa in those years was no less dangerous than the front line. The city was full of weapons. Thousands of demobilized men returned from the front. Some of them were former criminals, amnestied in the first days of the war. They formed gangs that robbed warehouses, attacked trains, killed officers. More than 100 armed groups operated in the region. The NKVD couldn't cope. Streets were dangerous, even during the day. The city shuddered from a wave of crimes, theft, murder, raids on military trains. Locals whispered that the authorities were weak, and the war had spawned new masters of life. Zhukov realized ordinary methods wouldn't restore order. And then he conceived a daring operation. Codename Masquerade. Do you want to know how the marshal made himself the bait for criminals? The essence of the operation was simple and brilliant. NKVD officers and army scouts dressed in the uniforms of frontline soldiers allegedly returning from the war. They got drunk in taverns, boasted loudly that they were carrying money, weapons, trophies. Bandits quickly took the bait and tried to attack. Operatives and soldiers were already waiting in ambush. The arrest was instant. Doors blocked, lights out. The order, freeze, hands up. Many resisted. Then they were destroyed on the spot. Zhukov personally controlled the operation. He demanded daily reports, went on raids himself. Witnesses recalled that the marshal could unexpectedly appear on the city streets with a patrol, check documents, watch the operatives work. He said, "If we don't clean up the city, the war will return, only now not with Germans, but with our own bandits." The results shocked everyone. In the first months of the operation, more than 10,000 criminals were detained. The largest gangs operating in the region were liquidated. Hundreds of machine guns, dozens of light machine guns, tons of stolen goods were found in warehouses. The number of robberies dropped almost to zero. The city breathed a sigh of relief. Locals said that now one could walk the streets even at night. But Zhukov's methods were harsh. He spared no one, neither former frontline soldiers nor party workers if they covered for criminals. Some officials were arrested right at meetings. Moscow watched his actions closely. Stalin, on one hand, valued the result. On the other, feared the marshal's growing authority. In 1947, Zhukov is transferred even further, to the Ural military district. This is no longer just exile, but actual isolation from big politics. Zhukov obeyed the order, but did not break. He continued to serve, train troops, maintain discipline. He knew his time would come. Can you imagine what a man feels who was greeted with triumph in Moscow and now commands again in the periphery? And the time did come. March 5th, 1953. Stalin dies. A struggle for power begins in the country. Zhukov returns to Moscow and receives an appointment as Deputy Minister of Defense. His finest hour comes in the summer, when the decision is made to arrest Beria. Zhukov personally enters the office, gives the signal, and officers take Beria into custody. It was like a continuation of Operation Masquerade, only now the target was the chief executioner of the USSR. Do you want to know how this changed the Marshal's fate? After Beria's arrest, Zhukov's popularity grows again. He becomes a symbol of strength and justice. But ahead awaits a new conflict, this time with Khrushchev, who did not tolerate overly independent people near him. Dismissal and Oblivion. The 1950s. After Beria's arrest and Khrushchev's consolidation of power, Zhukov is again at the center of events. He is appointed Minister of Defense of the USSR. He reforms the army, restores order, reduces redundant units, strengthens combat capability. The military believes in their marshal again. But Khrushchev begins to worry. Zhukov is too popular, too independent. Are you ready to learn how political envy destroyed the career of the victor of Berlin? In 1957, a crisis flares up in the Politburo. The so-called anti-party group, Molotov, Malenkov, Kaganovich, tries to oust Khrushchev. Zhukov takes the side of the first secretary and organizes the delivery of Central Committee members by plane to Moscow to thwart the plot. Khrushchev remains in power. It would seem Zhukov is his savior. But it is from this moment that their relationship begins to sour. Khrushchev didn't like being indebted. In the autumn of 1957, Zhukov goes on an official visit to Yugoslavia. While he is abroad, a political intrigue begins in Moscow. He is accused of Bonapartism, of allegedly trying to put the army above the party. When he returns, he is summoned to a meeting of the Presidium of the Central Committee. Khrushchev reads the decision. Zhukov is relieved of his post as Minister of Defense. For many, it was a shock. The man who accepted the victory parade, liberated the country, destroyed Army Group Center, and took Berlin, is in disgrace again. Zhukov is sent into retirement. He returns to his house in Rublyovo, cut off from the army and big politics. These years will be the hardest for him. He continues to write memoirs, but publication is delayed. The manuscript is subjected to strict censorship. Part of his notes are seized by the organs. There were rumors that surveillance was established on him. Neighbors said that cars with men in plain clothes were constantly on duty around the house. Zhukov rarely appeared in public. Sometimes he was invited to receptions or anniversaries, but he gave no speeches. Officers, whom he once led into attack, came to him secretly just to shake his hand. Legends began to form among the people. Allegedly, Stalin sentenced him back in 1945, but didn't dare shoot him. Rumors of the condemned marshal became part of folk memory. Can you imagine what a man feels who stormed Berlin and now sits in silence, reads books, and waits to see if he will be called again? In the 60s, Zhukov finally managed to get his memoirs published, albeit in a truncated form. The book aroused huge interest. Print runs sold out instantly. Soldiers and officers read it voraciously. But the Central Committee treated it warily. The Marshal wrote too frankly about the war and about Stalin. This only strengthened the myth of Zhukov as a man who always told the truth. He remained for millions a symbol of victory, the man who managed to win the main victory in history. But for the party leadership, he was inconvenient. Until the end of his life, Zhukov never returned to big politics. Do you want to know how this story ends? How Zhukov will live his last years, how the country will remember him, and how historians will argue about him? Last years and legacy. The 1970s. Georgy Konstantinovich Zhukov lives quietly, almost in seclusion. He writes a lot, edits his memoirs, fights censorship. Every chapter of the manuscript goes through the ideological departments of the Central Committee. Many pages are blacked out. Specific assessments of Stalin and military operations are forbidden to print. Zhukov argues, writes angry letters, but is forced to compromise. He wanted the truth about the war to reach the soldiers, the people. Are you ready to learn how the Marshal fought for his word, even after power was taken from him? In 1969, the book Reminiscences and Reflections goes to print. It becomes a real bestseller. Copies fly off the shelves instantly. Soldiers read it in barracks. Old men cry, remembering fallen comrades. This book turns Zhukov into a legend in his lifetime. But in the Central Committee, it is met with caution. The Marshal is too frank, too direct. Rumors circulate that a new crackdown is being prepared, that they want to ban reprinting again. Zhukov appears in public less and less. He suffers from the consequences of wounds sustained in the war. His heart and legs are failing, but he holds on. When he is invited to victory parades, the crowd greets him with applause. For the people, he remains a symbol of victory, even if party leaders try to keep him in the shadows. Can you imagine what a man feels who is loved by the country, but distrusted by the government? In 1974, Zhukov's health deteriorates sharply. He suffers a stroke, is treated for a long time, but never returns to active life. On June 18, 1974, Georgy Zhukov dies. The country says goodbye to him as a hero. His funeral takes place on Red Square. The urn with his ashes is immured in the Kremlin wall next to the greatest people of the era. Thousands of people come to say goodbye. Soldiers cry, veterans salute, the city freezes. After Zhukov's death, attempts were made more than once to erase his name from history. But the people's memory proved stronger. Streets, squares, cities are named after him. Monuments to the Marshal stand throughout the country. After the collapse of the USSR, historians returned to his figure, began to evaluate his role in a new way. Some see him as a savior who, at the cost of incredible sacrifices, managed to stop the enemy and lead the country to victory. Others accuse him of cruelty, of treating soldiers as expendable material. Who was he really? A savior or an executioner? Everyone must answer this question for themselves. This is the path Georgy Konstantinovich Zhukov traveled. From a poor peasant boy to the man accepting the victory parade. From a hero honored by millions to a disgraced commander sitting in the silence of his own home. His life is the story of a country, its victories, its tragedies, its freedom paid for with a price. Write in the comments. Who was Zhukov to you? A savior who kept the country from ruin, or a cruel executioner who did not spare his soldiers? Your answer is also part of this history.